I am Socrates. I came into the world in Alopes, one of Athens' humble outskirts, where the streets smelled of stone and dust. My father, Sophroniscus, was a stone mason. He shaped rocks with his hands and breathed life into statues. My mother, Phaenarete, was a midwife. She guided women through the pain of childbirth. I grew up between these two crafts. One gave form, the other gave life. And over time, I realized some minds are as hard as stone, and the labor of thought is no less painful than the labor of birth. So, I decided to shape as my father did, not with a hammer, but with words. And I helped bring forth as my mother did. Not bodies, but minds. I wanted people to come to know themselves, not through declarations, but through questions. For questions prod the sleeping soul. As a child, Athens was my playground. I ran through the streets, wrestled with other boys, threw stones, but I always felt a certain emptiness inside. Everyone else seemed to know what they were supposed to do. The gods will it, they'd say, or it's always been this way. But I couldn't stop myself. Why? That question was my truest companion growing up. I went to school, memorized Homer's epics, played the lyre, practiced gymnastics. I was strong in body, but my real strength sprouted from the questions growing in my mind. I would walk through the market, watching merchants shout that their goods were the finest, or priests claiming sacrifices would bring prosperity. I listened, but something inside me whispered, "Is this true? How do they know?" In my youth, I heard of philosophers like Anaxagoras, who spoke of the cosmos and the stars. For a time, I thought truth might be found in the sky. But then I saw people sought to explain the universe, yet failed to understand themselves. That's when I turned inward, toward understanding the soul, virtue, and what it means to be human. One day, I stood before a temple and saw the words, "Know thyself." Something echoed within me. Truth wasn't out there, it was inside. Though I didn't yet know what that truth was, I understood this. Curiosity builds the soul. One day, a spark lit within me, but it wasn't knowledge. It was the awareness of my own ignorance. I know only one thing, that I know nothing. That's what I said. People looked at me. Some laughed, some scoffed, but I embraced my ignorance. For only an empty cup can be filled. The one already full can only spill over. Now you sit before me in silence. Your eyes are on me, but I speak to what lies behind them. Only silence understands those who are born of a question. Stay silent. Let me speak. I never gave advice. I never offered knowledge. I only asked questions, because answers lull you to sleep, but questions wake you up. I never aimed to teach people. I tried to help them give birth to themselves, just like my mother did. And now, if there is silence in this room, it is because that silence is within you. And know this, that silence is the cradle of thought. So I leave you with a question, unanswered. How do you know who you are? A man's journey sometimes begins not by his own will, but by someone else's words. Mine began that way. One day, my friend Hierophon came to me. He told me of a prophecy from the oracle Pythia at the Temple of Delphi. There is no one wiser among the Athenians than Socrates, my first reaction was simple. That can't be true, because I knew I was not wise. I never saw myself that way. But if a God says so, then either I knew something without realizing it, or everyone else was fooling themselves. With that thought, I set out. I questioned politicians, poets, craftsmen. They were all confident, but the more I questioned, the more I saw the gaps beneath their knowledge. Behind their verses, there was no truth. Behind their offices, no insight. The God had not pointed to me as the wisest, but as a measure of wisdom itself. What set me apart was that I knew I was ignorant, and that difference drove me forward. But this journey didn't begin with words alone. It was forged through war as well. I am Socrates. I met war in Athens, as the shadow of the Peloponnesian War fell over us. I put on my armor. I fought at Potidaea, Delium, Amphipolis. The armor was heavy, the shield a burden. But sometimes, war is a lightness. It strips away the mask. The true face is revealed. At Potidaea, I saved young Alcibiades from death. He was a fiery youth, sparks in his eyes. He felt indebted to me, but I had only done my duty. That day, I began to ask, what is courage? Is it merely the suppression of fear, or something deeper, a kind of wisdom? At Delium, during our retreat, everyone panicked. I was calm in the chaos, because my mind was steady, because in that moment, even death became something to question. Is death an end, or another beginning? I did not know, but that not knowing set me free. War taught me the limits of the body, but when I returned to Athens, I began to question the limits of the soul. I took off my armor, but not my observations. I wandered through the agora, through the markets. I watched people, merchants praising their goods with oaths, poets reciting verses full of meaning. But I had only one question for them. What is the truth behind this? Most could not answer, because they believed what they said, but did not know why they believed it. In this time, some young men began to gather around me. Alcibiades, that fiery boy, was now a young man. Xenophon was calmer, more thoughtful. I taught them nothing. I only asked questions. What is justice? What is courage for? And they began to think. To think is not easy, because thinking is facing oneself. Sometimes I felt like a stranger in Athens, because what everyone else chased did not belong to me. Money, power, fame, position. I sought only truth. I stayed away from politics, because those who chase power often forget themselves. War taught me courage. The agora taught me the fragility of people. And from both, I drew a lesson. Truth is born of questioning. The prophecy at Delphi set me on my path, but the wars in the streets made me who I am, and now I understand. It is my duty to ask questions. I lived not to display my own wisdom, but to reveal the ignorance of others. I used to set out early in the mornings, while the sun was still waking, behind the hill of Nyx. I would walk among the echoing steps on the stone streets. Before reaching the agora, I would pause beneath the shade of olive trees, thinking about whom I would question that day. The agora, the heart of Athens, the cries of vendors mixing with the voices of philosophy. In that crowd, I carefully chose whom to speak with. politician, a poet, a craftsman, or simply a young man watching curiously from the side, it all began with a prophecy. The oracle of Delphi said, "Socrates is the wisest man, but I was a man who knew that I knew nothing." That contradiction is what set me in motion. I began to ask. To the politicians, I said, "What is justice?" They were sure of themselves, but their answers were hollow. I asked the poets, and saw that they did not understand the meaning of their own verses. The craftsmen knew what they did, but they did not know life. This search gave birth to my method. Question upon question, simple yet sharp. As soon as I received one answer, I tested it with another question, because most beliefs collapse under the first challenge. This method was later called elenchus, but to me, it was simply conversation, a way to make people face themselves. This path began to change me. I understood that truth was not a destination, but an endless journey of questioning, and I was not alone on this road. The youth began to listen to me. They would stand, then sit down, repeat my questions, and debate them among themselves. But this brought about a problem, because when their fathers learned they were listening to me, they became afraid. That fear was not of me, but of change. Alcibiades, handsome, intelligent, ambitious, he told me. He admired me, but I never guided him. I only questioned what he said. In time, he entered politics, and things got complicated. Critias, harsh, disciplined. He later became part of the 30 tyrants. I was not his teacher, but I was someone who made him think. And so, I was no longer just a thinker. To some, I had become a threat. They said, "He corrupts the youth, makes them question tradition." But all I ever asked was, what is virtue? Whose is justice? What does it mean to be good? If these questions corrupt, perhaps something was already ready to be corrupted. Plato emerged during this time. His sharp intellect stood out. He would respond to one question with another, and he would keep thinking. Xenophon was quieter, but he listened as well. I did not teach, I only made them think, and that act of thinking was inspiration to some, fear to others. By then I knew, in this city, not only the speaker, but also the listener would be judged, because ideas are dangerous, and the traces ideas leave behind are even more dangerous. Athens was a theater. Everyone played a role, but I could see the strings behind the curtain, and in those years, my character was complete. A man who sought truth and questioned without end. That made me both powerful and alone. Athens was wounded. The Peloponnesian War crushed not only bodies, but the soul of the city as well. Freedom was chained. The 30 tyrants came. Power took precedence over thought. Socrates stood aside, but I was not silent. Alcibiades, Critias, they were part of the chaos. They had spoken with me, learned from me, and now their actions were being blamed on me. Socrates is dangerous, they said. Yet I only asked, is this justice? Is power the same as truth? I stayed away from politics because I saw that power blinds a person. But in the agora, on the streets, in hidden corners, I continued to speak. Can virtue be taught? Is justice simply what the people approve of? One man said, "Whatever the people say, that is justice." And I asked, "What if the people are wrong?" He fell silent. That was my method, to confront people with the walls of their own beliefs. Some became uncomfortable. Socrates questions tradition. He disrespects the gods, but I never denied the gods. I only questioned those who claimed to speak in their name. The youth were around me. Plato listened intently. He repeated what I said, building his own ideas. But Athens was changing. Defeat had filled the people with anger and fear. I became a target. They say he corrupts the youth. I had only helped them find themselves. During those years, my character grew even more resolute. My questioning grew sharper. I understood that truth brings enemies, but I did not stop, because a life without truth is not worth living. Athens began to paint me as a threat, but I was only a mirror. I showed people their own faces. Those days were like a silent storm. As I walked through the streets, I looked into faces. Many were anxious. Some blamed me calmly, others openly. Words were spoken, not directly, but through implication, corrupting the youth, not believing in the gods, introducing new gods. These were just words, but the fear behind them was deep. One night, I went to my friends. There was worry on their faces. "You must flee," they said. "If you stand trial, your end may be death." But I did not flee. To flee would be to betray the path I believed in. That night, I thought deeply. I questioned myself. How should a virtuous man act? What does justice require? When the day of the trial came, I had made my decision. I would neither plead nor remain silent. I would simply speak the truth. What I said in court was simple. I explained that wisdom begins by knowing one's ignorance, that questioning is what makes a person virtuous, and that I had never, with ill intent, led the youth astray. But my words were not accepted. My sentence was clear: to renounce my values or accept death. I chose death because to live must not mean to abandon questioning. Now I am beside you. You sit quietly, but I know your silence is as valuable as my voice. Athens summoned me to court. Meletus, Anytus, Lycon. The charges were clear. He does not believe in the gods, and he corrupts the youth. I stood before a jury of 500. I was Socrates. I was not afraid. I made my defense, but not with arrogance. I said, "I know that I do not know. If I am wise, it is because of this." I smiled at the accusations. Atheism, the daemon within me, had always been by my side. Corrupting the youth, I awakened them. I gave voice to souls wandering in sleep. In court, I turned to Meletus. "Do you know what justice is?" He was silent, because I showed them their own ignorance, and that made them angry. My sentence was set: death. My friends wept. Crito lowered his head. Plato hid his tears. But I was calm, because I knew true death is the silence of the soul. Days passed in the prison. Crito came again. "Escape, save yourself," he said. But I did not flee. An unjust escape is a life without virtue, I said. To flee would be to deny philosophy. The poison was prepared. I took the hemlock in hand. My friends were around me. Some were silent. Some were overwhelmed with tears. As I looked at them, I thought, true death is not the separation from the body, but a life poorly lived. I drank the poison. There was a strange peace within me. My body slowly grew heavy, but my mind was clear. I kept speaking. I kept questioning. Even with my last breath, I was discussing the meaning of life. And then I spoke my final words. We owe a rooster to Asclepius, because death can be a cure. If life has passed like a sickness, then death may be a healing. After my death, my words did not fade. My students carried me forward. Plato, my closest, debated, thought, and questioned with me for hours. He wrote, and my voice continued to live in his lines. There was Xenophon. His writing was simpler, but loyal. He tried to understand and to explain me. Some interpreted me differently, but that was natural because philosophy is not the journey of one person, but of all of us. I was just a man, but my questions became echoes. From the murmur of the agora, they spread to the thoughts of ages. Today, thousands of years later, if someone still asks, what is virtue? If someone still wonders, how is justice lived? Then in that moment, I am still here. As I sit silently beside you, know this. Philosophy is the effort to understand life, and this effort continues even after death. At the heart of my philosophy is a method. It is to prompt people to think through questions. They call it dialectic. First, a person claims to possess certain knowledge on a subject. Through my questions, I challenge that knowledge. Is it really so? I ask. Where does this knowledge come from? I inquire. Often, the person finds inconsistencies in what they say. They fall into contradiction. At that moment, they realize they do not actually know, and that awareness of ignorance is the door to knowledge. Questioning can be uncomfortable, but accepting our ignorance is the beginning of progress. I did not teach my students. I helped them find their own thoughts. I planted a seed in their minds and watched that seed grow. Questioning requires courage. One must step outside their comfort zone. But this path is the gateway to a virtuous and conscious life. As you sit there silently, I am passing this method on to you, because within every person there is a philosopher. Life and death are the deepest riddles of the human mind. I did not fear death, because death may be the liberation of the soul, but life, without questioning, is meaningless. Wisdom is a journey filled with courage and virtue. My task was to invite people to this path. Sometimes I was misunderstood. Sometimes I was alone, but I never gave up, because true philosophy continues even in silence. Now, as I sit quietly beside you, it is an honor to share these thoughts. I hope you too find your own questions on this journey. And remember, the only thing I know is that I know nothing